Good afternoon. My name is Todd Hibbs, and I'm the wrestling coach here at Alma College. I thought about pulling 3 or 4 of you from right up front to demonstrate some technique with me, but I'll spare you that today. Instead, what I want to talk about today are some people who are very important to me. In fact, they are people who are important to all of us. These people have been changing the world for centuries now, at least since the advent of higher education. These people have had an amazing impact on technology, medicine, research, and the arts and literature. And today, they populate our campuses from coast to coast, large universities and small colleges. Of course, the group of people I'm talking about are first-generation college students, or as I like to affectionately refer to them as Firgins. Firgins arrive on our campuses, and the first thing we do is we argue about how to define them. Who are they? Who are our first-generation students? Are they people who their parents didn't attend college? Are they people whose parents didn't attend a 4-year college? Or are they people whose parents simply didn't graduate from college? We spend more time defining them and arguing about them than sometimes helping them, and that's very unfortunate. I like to look at Firgins as people who blaze a courageous and new college path beyond that of their parents. Now, when these first-generation students get to our campuses, like Alma College, Mid-Michigan Community College, Central Michigan or Michigan State, they face certain obstacles. The first of those, as you can see here, economic difficulties. First-generation college students typically come from working-class, blue-collar families. Families that sometimes have lived pay to pay and struggled and haven't been able to put together a college fund, or at least one that's big enough to support 4 years of education. I've seen first-generation students struggle to buy books and try to complete coursework without having the textbooks for their classes. You can see where that's going to be a hurdle to graduation. Another area that I think our first-generation students struggle is because we don't provide enough support systems. I'll talk more specifically about this in a moment. So for now, I'll skip to the third one, cultural capital issues. Again, being reminded that these students are coming to us from blue-collar families, working-class families. They arrive on a campus that is typically what? Middle-class, white-collar employees, talking about things in a world that's very different from the one that they grew up in. And sometimes our first-generation students sort of go into a hole. They lose their assertiveness because they don't connect. They don't transition to college as well as other students might. But maybe the first struggle we have with first-generation students is in helping them to find the vision to attend college at all. I'm a first-generation college student, and I know when I was young, I heard messages that were discouraging, like, well, you might not have the money to go to college. No one from our community does that. We go to work in the coal mines or the steel mills. It can be very discouraging, and we can block someone from their vision to go to college. You see, I grew up in a family where a grandfather on one side had quit school in the 5th grade to work on the railroads in eastern Ohio, and a grandfather on the other side had dropped out of school in the 7th grade to be a coal miner in West Virginia. Now, both of my parents did finish high school, but they never thought of going to college. In the 1970s in the Ohio Valley, the man of the house went out and he worked in an industry that supported the steel mills of the valley, and that's exactly what my father did. My mom, in order to support the family when times got tough, would clean houses or churches, wherever she could gather some funds for the family. But somewhere along the way, they created a vision for me, and I remember the night that it happened. I was a sophomore in high school. My family loved football, and we were watching Monday Night Football together, when my dad disappeared at about halftime. He went into the kitchen, came back out a little bit later, and when he walked back out, he was carrying that working class reminder of who we were as a family, the gray lunchbox with the thermos. He walked towards the front door, and I'll never forget, he leaned up with his left hand, and that was hanging, that lunchbox, from his thumb. He looked back at me. My dad was 6'1", 250 pounds. I'd only ever seen him cry one time, and that was when his father had passed away a few years earlier. So when I saw the tears streaming down my dad's cheeks, I became very concerned. I said to him, "Dad, what's wrong?" And he looked at me and he said, "Don't do this." I didn't know what he meant, but he went on. He said, "Don't put yourself in a position of having to accept a job that you hate, that you have to go out and do all the time to support your family." He said, "Todd, I'd rather stay here tonight. I'd rather watch the rest of this game with you," as the tears continued to roll down his face. "I'd like to stay here and sleep next to your mother. But I've got to go at midnight to this dark, dirty place, sometimes too hot, sometimes too cold, that has torn my body to shreds and sent me for surgery after surgery so that I can support my family." And in that moment, my vision was created. We need to help to create those visions for our first-generation students. And you can do so from your seat here. You can do so as an aunt or an uncle. You can do so as a neighbor, sitting by someone in church. But we need to help our first-generation college students to find their vision. And then when we get them to campus, we need to support them. I'm not sure we do enough yet. You know, I look at other populations that are before you here, and we've done a lot to support these populations. Decades ago, we didn't see women on our college campuses. We did a good thing. We recruited women to campus. We put in place support systems, and we began to graduate them. And now across America, women have surpassed men in graduating from college in many areas. We've done the same thing for domestic minorities. We've recruited intentionally and brought African American students, Latinos, and other populations to campus. Again, a great thing. And we've watched it work. We still have work to do, but we've watched it improve. We've also brought international students who barely knew our language to our campus. We help them to learn, we give them an education, they go on to graduate school, and they either stay here or they go home and contribute to their communities. But what about our first generation students? What about those working class kids from right here? Are we doing enough for them? You see, I've had a front row seat for this for a while now. I've worked on college campuses for over 20 years. I've been a professor. I've worked in residence life, judicial affairs. I've even been a college vice president. But it's through my job as a wrestling coach that I think I had the perfect lens. I was coaching wrestling for a number of years, and I was finding that my student athletes were really struggling financially, with adjustment issues, being retained in college and not graduating. And then I discovered a study by the National Collegiate Athletic Association that pointed out in 2010 that of all sports on all campuses, wrestling has the highest percentage of first-generation college students. You think about it, right? A tough, blue-collar sport. These wrestlers come to these campuses, a third or more of the roster, and they struggle with those issues I talked about. It totally makes sense to us. But then I started to look further. What about other students on our campuses as well? And I learned from the Department of Education that 33 to 50% of our students, depending on the type of campus, is it a community college, is it a large public university, or a small private school, but fully as many as half of our students can be first-generation students. And that next statistic scares me. 80% of virgins do not graduate in 6 years, a study from the Pell Institute, and many of those will never graduate. What's the cost of that? What does that do to us as a society if we continue to not graduate them from our campus? Here are some examples of who these people are. Sonia Sotomayor, Ben Carson, Colin Powell, or Louis Pasteur. You know, we talk all the time about being in this globally competitive marketplace now, right? And we're interested in remaining leaders in the world. But if we only graduate The young men and women whose moms and dads went to college, will our intellectual army be large enough to continue to lead around the globe? Or do we need to make sure that these other students are getting an opportunity, like these ones, to graduate from our campuses? I've pointed out the problem, so now what can we do? Well, we have to remind ourselves. What are the things that we need to look at? First of all, as I mentioned to you earlier, anyone in this audience can help someone to find a college vision by encouraging them and talking with them about chasing their dreams. Perhaps you can help with economic difficulties if you have the capacity to offer a scholarship to a first-generation student to stay in school. Or if you're a small business owner, maybe you can help one of them by providing them with a job so they can actually buy the books that they need for their classes. Or better yet, if you're a college administrator, how about we dip into those $100 million or billion-dollar endowments that are sitting there to make sure that we continue to be leaders in this world and we graduate our first-generation students. Insufficient support systems, we need targeted programs just like those ones we've had for women, for domestic minorities, and for international students. And lastly, those cultural capital issues. If you're a professor, as I've been on campus, realize that when you only talk about your trips to Europe, your ski vacation in Vail, and these types of subjects, that you might not be connecting with someone who grew up with flea markets and being in 4-H and going to the county fair. We've got to bridge that difference between the blue collar and the white collar on our campuses. So I would ask you, as you think about these students on our campuses, be reminded the cures to our diseases, cancer, Alzheimer's, the technological advances that we need, the arts, the literature that raises our spirit and soothes our soul, that's all walking around our campuses right now. Please help me to make sure that it doesn't walk away. Thank you.